Thank you, Brian. So this is the second time we're doing the same webinar. We do have a lot of repeat requests. When are we going to do it again? And needless to say, this area, the subject we're going to address is very hot in terms of business operations of IT department for SMB organizations and even for enterprise. Before, it used to be that this traditional office setup where you have like an office building, and you have a server room where servers are, and you have users, and users sit at the desks, and they access data on the server. As time progressed, the servers technically moved to the cloud, first to Colo, then to cloud, to Microsoft Azure, AWS, some stayed at the Colo, some stayed on-prem. Users moved from being in office to work at home during the pandemic, and most right now in somewhat of a hybrid environment. So the questions customers have been asking us for a long time, at least 5 years that I can remember, is like, can we move completely to the cloud, to Microsoft, and not have Active Directory? And the short answer was yes in the past, but and Microsoft had all kinds of convoluted solutions which wasn't really ready. Well, right now with this thing we're going to talk about, Microsoft Azure Active Directory with Microsoft Intune, they do. So the Microsoft Azure Active Directory now has known as Entra ID. It's a different name, but essentially it's the same product. The limit before was primary is that you have so-called domain architecture, where you have something called Active Directory, which is you have servers, right, which have databases on them that contains usernames and passwords, of your users. Among it has groups, computer accounts, contacts, etc. But that's what it has: usernames and passwords. So this is the directory. Think about it as a phone book. And Active Directory is because it was supposed to be able to read write simultaneously to multiple servers, multiple domain controllers, and multiple locations. Even though it wasn't true, but that's what it was called. And right now, so you have so-called other servers and other computers that were joined to the, this so-called domain. And even though you have these computers in, for example, in Azure and other Colo, you still have to talk to the same domain. Did this thing change with us moving to Azure AD? Yes, it did. And this is what we learned. And this is what this webinar is about. With that, I'm going to pass virtual microphone to Chris Capps, who is going to go through the slides, and I'm going to pitch in. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. We'd like it to be a interactive discussion. It's possible we learn something from you, not just learn something from us. And we're going to start. Chris?
Thank you, Roman. And thank you all for joining us. As Roman mentioned, we will be discussing the migration from on-premise Active Directory to the cloud. We will cover a variety of things, a variety of topics, items to consider before you get started, potential roadblocks. We do understand that 100% migration is not applicable to all environments. But for the most part, you can get your services moved and you can still be functional without having the liability of having all of that on-premise infrastructure in your background. As Roman mentioned, if you do have any questions, please feel free to engage. I don't want to kill you with PowerPoint. I absolutely can if I want to. So please, if you have something you want to bring it up, let's have a conversation about it. All right. So before you move, there are a number of considerations to make. Essentially, you want to take inventory of your entire environment to identify the things that may cause you problems during the migration or may prevent the migration entirely. So questions to ask yourself are, something like, what systems does my Active Directory integrate with? If you have a lot of legacy systems, right, a lot of industry-specific systems, there is a chance that that vendor that you're using for that system does not allow a cloud existence. That's probably the first question you want to ask yourself, because if you find yourself in that position, you have to figure out what to do with that software before you can move forward with the migration. There are good examples of this. So good examples would be like a law firm's database system, right? So something like Amicus, and not Amicus specifically. I'm just throwing that out there as a name. But any kind of operation specific, industry specific type software that you may have had in your environment since the inception of your organization, you're really going to want to look at those and see if they can exist in the cloud. After beyond that, you're going to identify what you have set up for single sign-on via Active Directory. These single sign-on configurations will need to be migrated to the cloud environment as well. For the most part, if you can do single sign-on in Active Directory, you can do single sign-on in Azure AD. So it's just a matter of getting that configuration translated. Second mention on don't have any systems that absolutely not migrate to the cloud. Generally speaking, as I mentioned, it's going to be the vendor software. It can include other things. Let's say you have an old database that is just completely, the software and infrastructure it resides on is just so old that it's not compatible. In those situations, you're going to want to do some discovery and testing, right? Maybe there is an unsupported migration path that, if you test it properly, it'll be okay. So those things, when you get to something that looks like it might be a complete roadblock, I caution you to not throw your hands in the air and give up, right? Let's look at what that roadblock might be and what it might actually entail. Before you start the process, you want to make sure that you have backdoor access to everything in case something goes awry. Specifically, you're not going to get in a whole lot of trouble as you decommission the Active Directory environment. But let's say, syncing goes wrong and something goes off in the cloud, you need to be able to make sure that you have access to anything that you would need for migration. So it does include the on-premise Active Directory, but in most cases, we're going to have years of backdoor accounts in those environments. If we're looking at a cloud environment where it's a new situation, right, we might.
Chris, I think we lost you. A wonderful world of Teams. I guess I will take over. So in order to have, in addition to having backdoor, you guys want to make sure that, for example, when you just join servers from the domain, that you do have access to at least local admin access to each one of the servers and workstations, so you can go ahead and get back into them. A lot of times you discover that the password you had on file doesn't work, so you want to go ahead and test it before it happens. Another thing here that's missing, obviously, it's comes self-evident. You do want to make sure that you have a very good backup of your entire environment, especially Active Directory as such, but all of the servers, database servers, especially file systems, before you start the process, because something may go wrong and then it's going to be a problem moving forward. Chris, are you back online? Just a second, we're experiencing technical difficulties. Give us about 30 seconds.
Testing.
We got you.
We got you.
Oh, that was weird. I apologize. All right, let's go. Yeah, thanks for picking that up, Roman. I don't recall where you lost me.
I finished with backdoor access. The next subject talk about is licensing.
I gotcha. Yeah, all right. Apologies, everybody. So you do want to make sure that you have your proper licensing in 365 before you move over. Not that you can't apply licensing after the fact, but the best plan is to get the environment at least where you want it to be for a baseline, and then work to move your people over and work on that final migration. So much of the functionality and feature set of 365 is contingent upon licensing. Specific security items, right? You want to make sure that you have them in place. So just always a good idea to make sure you review the licensing before you move to the cloud. And then you need to ask yourself how you're going to be managing your machines. So, traditionally we would manage our machines via GPO in the on-premise Active Directory. The cloud environment operates very similarly, utilizing Intune. So you can use Entra ID and Intune in combination to manage your devices. You can go so far as to grab an export of your existing group policies, import those into Intune, and it'll essentially analyze those and tell you what settings make sense, what settings aren't applicable, etc., and help you go through and build the policies in Intune to match your GPO settings that you had in Active Directory. If you don't want to go that route, you absolutely can build them out from scratch to where you want them to be. As I said, clean slate, and then go ahead and work through that onboarding. And as you onboard, your machines will become compliant with your chosen configuration.
Okay, and to add to the big elephant in the room is that the fact that client to client, we all find the same problem. Active Directory has never been cleaned up before. I'm not talking about structural cleanup when some of it is important, like move a user around, but content cleanup. You have accounts back from 1997 and they're, sometimes still active. And you do have obsolete groups. When you talk about group policies, it's sometimes you have 300 objects. You've seen that before. And each of them does something. So it's going to be very difficult to basically move such a monstrosity to the cloud. So an ID content cleanup project or two, sometimes you need to do it in stages, is usually recommended. And this is what we've seen is like customer wants to go ahead and start on this project, or, I have so many users, so many accounts. I don't know what this group does. I don't know what group policy object does. So you have to clean up, pare it down to the point that it only has what you have, just user accounts, system accounts, and distribution groups. And then you can go ahead and, move. Chris, back over to you.
Thank you, Roman. Yeah, absolutely. One of the best things you can do before migration is to make sure that the Active Directory is sanitized, right? Because you do want to limit your attack surface area, absolutely, right? So any object in your environment that is not being used is an exposure to some extent. And so you want to limit that as much as possible. But also, it keeps the cloud environment sanitized, right? So if let's say I have an Active Directory, I've had it for 15 years, I've never really done anything in it, and I decide to move to the cloud, but I'm not going to clean anything up, and I'm just going to sync everything over. Well, now my cloud has just inherited that mess, and we want to keep that from happening. All right, considerations to make for the move. So kind of touched on this briefly. So is this move even feasible for my environment? Do I have anything that 100% has to have on-premise Active Directory? If you have legacy systems that cannot be migrated to the cloud, they're not going to, play in a hybrid environment for whatever reason, occupying the cloud may not be for your organization. You do want to consider what your existing integrations are. So what Active Directory is hooked into. So this does include your this does include any SSO applications, but it can also include print services and emailing services and anything else that you might lose functionality of by disabling Active Directory. You need to determine what needs to be handled now versus after the migration. So a lot of things you're going to want to get done ahead of time. There are plenty of functionalities inside of 365 and any other cloud that you may be looking into, where you can plan for and implement those configurations once you've got your organization to the cloud, once they're situated, once they're functional and day-to-day operations have resumed normal. And then you need to consider what are the potential roadblocks. We touched on that on the is this even feasible for my environment? But it goes beyond that, right? So you might have separation needs inside of your organization that might not allow you to go fully over. You might have specific industry-related printing systems, right, that might not be able to migrate into the cloud. Microsoft does have the Microsoft Universal Print. It does work pretty well. It facilitates the modern print server, if you will. But I absolutely know that there are drivers that Microsoft is not inherently going to have in that system because it's not a very common printer, and we're talking, manufacturing label printers, barcode printers, etc. Not that they couldn't have them, but you're more likely to find a roadblock in that type of environment. The more customized your environment is, the more chance that there's a roadblock. So preparing to move. Before you make the move, as I mentioned, you want to get the cloud environment prepped for the desired ending state, right? So as much as possible, you want to make sure that the cloud environment is configured to receive all of your objects, all of your computers, all of your productivity that Active Directory was handling. You do want to prepare the on-premise environment to desynchronize the objects. So this does include the sanitization, but it also preparing the actual sync mechanism to desynchronize objects. So a lot of times clients will create organizational units and determine the syncing or not syncing based on those organizational units. And those are, just think of those as buckets inside of Active Directory. Then you want to prepare your support team for the coming change. Everybody in your organization, any of your providers that support your organization that are, related, in the context of Active Directory and user management, you want to make sure that they are aware of what you're doing, what the plan is, what the timeline looks like, any of the gotchas to expect, etc. That way they can support you during that transition. Once you prep the support team, you want to prep the users. Same mantra, right? We want to make sure that the users aren't caught off guard. We want to make sure that they know if there's anything funky that they need to report it, because there are large operations going on in the background, and the faster we know about something going wrong, the faster we can figure out what it is and fix it. And then you want to prepare the items that need to be handled prior to the migration so they function once the users have been migrated. So distribution groups, emailing lists, any like client emailing lists you may have. Make sure that your users are familiar with how to operate in the cloud. They're familiar with how to use their MFA, etc.
Does anybody have any questions so far? Right, we're going to proceed, Chris.
All right, thank you.
Hold on a second, we do have a question.
Yep, shoot.
Michael.
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, Michael LaFond, Chris, we're running a hybrid AD Entra environment. Does any of this change for a hybrid as opposed to strictly AD environment?
So if you were already hybrid and you're looking to go cloud, you're already halfway there. It is, unfortunately, hybrid environments by nature are a bit messy, but you've essentially got a foot on both sides of the fence.
Michael, we can get after this call if you want us to advise you on specifics, but I mean it's client to client special. I mean, it's essentially the same considerations apply. Pretend that you have on-premise ID, go through the same process, and instead of on-premise ID, you have already partially Entra ID. Most of the clients now, I mean, that we've seen are hybrid, believe it or not. I mean, it's very rare to see somebody who is completely just AD only and on-premise exchange and things like this. So at this point in time, we kind of have to look, and see what every customer has. But I mean, the same principles that apply to both on-premise AD as well as a hybrid mode.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Roman. Michael, we can talk through your particular situation. Yes, you are essentially there. In simple terms, the only thing left to do is break the connection with Active Directory. However, if you're talking about a true hybrid join situation with Active Directory and Entra ID regarding your device enrollment, that can be a bit hairy. As last time I checked, Microsoft's recommended path is to reset every device. So absolutely happy to talk through that with you. For the process, so once you're ready, right, you've made the considerations, you've prepped the environment, it's time to ensure the process is valid with a test user and begin the migration. I recommend testing a percentage of your users, right? So let's say if you've got 100 users, let's pilot with 20. You can start with a handful, you can start with one, right? You can start with a test account. But as you go through the migration, you are going to want more and more business cases. You're going to want more and more sample data. So that can give you the nuances for the environment for each department, for each functionality, for each user. Depending on your method and level of integration, the process can be done all at once or on a per user basis. So if your environment is very simple and you don't have a lot of considerations, you don't have a lot of users, you're not inherently worried about a lot of downtime, you essentially can just flip the switch and turn off your Active Directory and turn off the sync, and you know, once your users are synced over, you're done. It gets more involved the longer the environment has been around and the larger the organization is. And because we have several moving parts to consider, including, so this is particular to us. So because we have several moving parts to consider, including the existence of Okta, we found it best to handle each user individually. Average time per user for migration was around 40 minutes, most of which were spent waiting on Microsoft to catch up with the changes. As I'm sure you all are aware, Microsoft syncs on its own clock. They have some guidance in the documentation, but that guidance could be anywhere from 2 to 24 hours, quite a long range. Given the proper instruction, it very well could be accomplished during after hours. Most users are actually able to handle their environment on their own because they're already used to logging in with the credentials and used to engaging with 365. The disappearance of Active Directory, at least for users that are no longer in an office, should essentially be invisible. Once you've moved, go ahead, shoot.
So basically, we do recommend the staged approach versus one time, because there's always some, even in simple environments, there's always a skeleton or two in a closet. So it's always best to be able to go back, and also something happens, you don't have to troubleshoot, 70 or 200 users. You can do 2 or 3 at a time. Chris, back over to you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Roman. So that's probably the biggest benefit of handling, a few handful of users at a time. If I were to take that same 100 user organization I spoke of earlier, even with a 20% test sample size, right? If I just flip the switch on the rest of the 80 users, right, I'm going to probably get 10, maybe 15 of those that are going to have issues, are going to need troubleshooting, they're going to need hand holding at minimum, and controlling that really eliminates that pull on your resources. Once we've moved, everybody's functional, nobody's noticed, 365 is the sole identity provider and business productivity suite provider, it's time to clean up. So you need to defederate. So defederate the domain allows you to control the objects associated with that domain in your cloud environment. If you do not defederate, you will get a fun error from Microsoft saying that this domain is managed in your Active Directory. You must edit it there. Well, we just moved from Active Directory and it no longer exists, right? So you got to make sure you defederate. You also need to make sure you turn off the Active Directory sync. This is less likely to cause issues, but it is good maintenance and cleanup practices. And then, so specifically, just so the 365 cloud no longer thinks that you are syncing to Active Directory. And then you can turn off whatever infrastructure it was that you had in the environment, right? You want to make sure you have a backup. Probably just the disk is fine, especially if it's a modern Windows server. You want to make sure you have a backup just in case you need to restore, stand anything back up, etc. Then you can go ahead and turn everything back off. So process changes. Depending on how involved your organization is with 365, you may or may not have a lot of changes. For the most part, the user experience doesn't change a whole lot. From an administrative perspective, the only thing that really changes is now all of your administration is done in the cloud, and all of your products are in the same portal for you to administer without having to jump between systems. On and offboarding becomes streamlined with less moving pieces. You can manage everything in the cloud, all of the attributes, all of your products, etc. The accounts have less sprawl across systems, so you can manage the accounts easier. It also, 365 has built-in access review functionality, right? So you can put periodic access review not only on managers, but also on the users themselves. And then the SSO configurations now take place in Azure. It's a bit less clunky than configuring SSO in Active Directory. And again, management all in one portal. Talk about some of the pros and cons. From my perspective, the pros far outweigh the cons for living in a cloud world. One, you get better control of your accounts as an organization. The environment becomes easier to clean and maintain because of the automated controls, because of the consolidated portal. You get less attack surface area. No longer do you have to worry about the security of that on-premise Exchange server or that on-premise domain controller, right? Those items are now essentially a liability of Microsoft, and theoretically they don't exist because you're no longer using an on-premise domain controller. You do get the full breadth of Microsoft security features. As I mentioned, a lot of this is contingent upon licensing, but a lot of it is baked into the default licensing that already exists within your organization. As an organization, Microsoft invests billions of dollars every year in cybersecurity research, and I don't know of an organization that can keep up with them as far as, you know, maintaining that infrastructure. They have a vested interest in ensuring at least the back end of Azure and 365 remains as secure as possible. They have a vested interest in patching items as soon as possible because they catch so much heat. There's just not an organization that can compare with them at the moment. Last pro, no more on-premise infrastructure. I don't have to have engineers to manage it. I don't have to worry about the hardware going out and how I'm going to handle that. And on the refresh cycle, I don't have to worry about the security liability. The con listed is also no more on-premise infrastructure. And the sense here is, traditionally, that's how we've done it, right? So many organizations are a bit hesitant to move away from it. Some organizations have a reliance upon that Active Directory environment on premise, right? And so if that's a need, this is absolutely a con for your organization.
To add, there's another con, it's implicit. I mean, most likely you'll need to procure additional Microsoft licensing, and, obviously all roads lead to Rome. You kind of have to pay more to Microsoft. More considering you don't have to maintain, protect to back up your on-premise service, which is a surface attack area target, it's definitely a right choice in today's day and age. Chris, back over to you.
Yep, thank you. Some highlighted lessons learned wanted to point out for you. So for single sign-on, very important to address critical single sign-on applications prior to migration. You want to make sure, so I'm specifically thinking of my accounting and finance teams, right? I want to make sure that they still have access to QuickBooks and any other monetary platform that they need, right? Because that's really critical to keep the business going. You may need to keep in mind that attribute mapping may be required. So if you have variants in your email or username formatting, you might need to make sure that those are going to match up in the new environment. So auto provisioning. Some systems have auto provisioning, and it's best to turn off auto provisioning during migration to mitigate account conflicts. A great example of this, right? During a move, you possibly have applications, software, etc., that are designed to, when you onboard somebody, it shoots out an email or it creates an account or it turns this feature on for them. During the move, you want to make sure that that's turned off so you don't have, a snowball effect of things breaking and nobody knows why because there's 30 different things that are set to auto provision. So definitely want to take a bit of inventory of that. The best way to do this is kind of go through your onboarding process and understand what automatically gets applied to your users when you onboard them. And then the service accounts. So if any of your Active Directory accounts are used as service accounts in other systems, so it's best to move them to the cloud environment. Make sure that they have security protections where possible. So I know in most service accounts we have to exclude them from MFA because the software is not going to handle the MFA token for the most part. But what we want to do is we want to implement compensating controls. So if I have to exclude a service account from MFA, I also want to put in a policy that restricts the login of that account from only the office IP, for instance. That is the last slide for me. I'm happy to take whatever questions you may have. Roman?
Yeah, so to sum it up, the process of moving is pretty simple, right? There is some post-mortem support configurations that need to happen. Some things will eventually come up, but they're one-offs, like somebody's old username, maiden name didn't get transferred properly, things like that. 50% of this migration is prep. So you have to assess your environment really well. You have to clean up your AD. You have to plan for the future. Most likely, you're going to use Intune in some capacity or another. So you don't want, like, for example, you have at least some kind of group policy right now, and then you move to Azure AD, and lo and behold, you need to start configuring Intune on a fly post-mortem. You basically want to have an Intune environment built out before you go. You have obviously legacy systems, like you have old servers, that join to the domain. You have to test them somehow, get vendor support. Is that compiled with Azure AD? Has someone done it? So the question comes up. There's two primary questions that come up when clients ask us what to do. One, what do we do about printing, right? Because we want to move everything to Azure, but on-premise print server. How do we print right now? Yeah, well, the solution, like Chris Kapp said, is Microsoft Print Services, which does handle most of it. Sometimes people decide to go to direct TCP/IP printing. Considering some people work remotely from now, that becomes not an issue because they print a local printer. But in general, that is the biggest consideration. And another one, let's say we have this Great Plains server 2016, which we still occasionally use. What do? We need to have it up occasional use, and because of that, we can move. Well, sometimes it is possible for those occasional ad hoc access to set up like a sandbox environment, either leave it back on premise or set up in Microsoft Azure where you have a copy of your old Active Directory with that server, and you give access to only specific individuals if they need to access this information for archival purposes. Sometimes if you find like people like really want to get rid of the Azure AD and they have this old app, they don't know what to do, well, maybe time to migrate. You have Cascam right now. New ones usually reside in the cloud, and therefore they don't pose this problem. That's about all I can add. Chris Capps, can you think of any other issues that clients typically bring to our attention other than Okta and do integrations?
No, not really. As Roman mentioned, the biggest thing for you to do is take inventory and plan. That's going to be the biggest help for any of these endeavors. Is just take inventory of what you have and plan for what you want.
Okay, excellent. And obviously, train yourself as much as you can, on what you're going to be supporting. All right, so the floor is open. Please let us know if you guys have any questions. We're here to answer them. Brian?
Yeah, hey guys, we have one from Dominic. Does logging into the workstations work the same when you're fully in the cloud? What about joining workstations to the domain?
Yeah, so great question. So no longer would you join workstations to the domain, you would join workstations to your Entra ID and Intune. The best way to go about doing that is to configure autopilot, and you can set up autopilot with your chosen distributor. So they automatically associate your machine that you've purchased with your tenant, and they ship it directly to your user. User logs in with their 365 credentials, and they're off to the races. So logging into the machine is still very much the same. You do get some additional functionality from a management perspective in that Windows Intune very much likes, Microsoft Intune very much likes Windows Hello for Business. So that's going to be, something for you to look at as you onboard. But the user experience logging into the machine should not change.
So Chris, how does it, I mean, like when user logs in with, like, they used to log into, like, let's say jsmith at, abcprinting.com, and now they're going to log in as jsmith, at abcprinting.net or something with whatever their Microsoft domain name is. Does it change user profile? Do we need to profile migration? Does it keep the profile? What is the procedure for that?
Yeah, so you should not need to do any profile migration. It should just automatically take the object with the user once you're doing the onboarding, the Intune onboarding. There's a couple of different ways, and I don't want to get too in the weeds on Intune, but there's a couple of different ways to do the Intune registration, right? You can do an organization registration where essentially administratively you're onboarding every machine into Intune. You can also set it up to where it's essentially a BYOD type environment where the users are onboarding their machines into Intune. And in that case, they're really just logging in with their credentials, and the credentials are then associated with the machine, et cetera, and you're applying your configuration policies.
All right. Did we answer this question? And does anybody else have any other questions?
Awesome. Well, let us know if you need anything. Yep, go ahead.
No, say Dominic just said thank you. I guess we're good to go with Dominic. Any other questions, guys? We'll open the floor one last time.
All right, so thank you so much for attending this webinar. We are going to do more webinars. Probably next one going to be about Intune, another pilot, how to automatically provision computers. We'll send out an invitation for the next one. Meanwhile, please don't hesitate to reach either to Brian, myself, Chris, or any of the account execs that are on this call if you have any questions, if you guys need for us to take a look at your Microsoft Active Directory, Azure AD environment to help you to plan or execute your migration. Thank you.